And welcome everyone, those of you here in person, those of you watching online. This is going to be part 2 of the bait of hasatan, and we're going to be, again, multiple weeks looking at how Satan tries to use offense to keep us away from the will of God. And that's so important that we have to realize where this offense is coming and where it's leading to, because that's God's way, and that's the devil's way in which he tries to take us off of God's path. I want to start, and I don't see anyone on the verses. Do we have someone back there to do the verses? I want to start with Genesis chapter 50, verses 19 through 20. Genesis 50, verse 19. Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for I am in the place of God." Verse 20. Verse 20. Next verse. There we go. "But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive." And that's truly what we have to see is God's plan. You know, last week we talked about 2 types of people. The first group were those who were truly treated unjustly, and the second group was those who think they were just treated unjustly. And this week I want to look at those who were truly treated unjustly. A beautiful story is the story of Joseph. That's why I wore my sweater, if you haven't figured that out yet. It's the color themes, you connect it together. Everyone calls this my sweater of many colors. Hopefully you will not throw me into a pit, but we'll go from there. And we all know the story of Joseph. The question is, how, if we were in his shoes, how would we act? If you have been generally mistreated, do you have the right to be offended? In other words, if people have truly done you wrong, and let's face it, you have been done wrong by people, right? Do you have the right then to be offended by them? And that's really the story that it's all about. Do we need to be offended, or better yet, do we try to bless them in return? Let's look at the story of Joseph. Joseph was the youngest of the brothers. How many of you were the youngest? I'm the youngest of 4. Some say that's the easy one, right? We get away with everything, right? But that is what happens. Jealousy then comes from the older brothers. But each of us are called and have a purpose in God's path. These 12 brothers were to be the father of the nations of Israel. They were the promise that God made to Abraham through Isaac and Jacob, and now here are the 12 that will develop into the 12 tribes of Israel, into the nation in which we were born, and for those of you who are Gentiles, who you were engrafted into. And we see the importance of what happens. Joseph could have easily been offended. God, though, gave him a vision. In that vision, he saw that not only would his brothers bow down to him, but his own mother and father. How would you like it if your youngest brother came to you and said, "You know what? One day you're going to be bowing down to me"? His brothers didn't like that too much, did they? Now, you have to assume that they had heard the stories from their father that they were going to be a part of a great nation. They already had a calling on their lives. Why were they so worried that the youngest would be the one in which they bowed down to? They took offense to the truth. And it grew into bitterness, to the point that they were willing to hate their own brother. To the point they were willing to literally put him to death. He had come out looking nice in his coat of many colors. They were hard at work in the fields. And something clicked. Something snapped in the brothers. Maybe that sweater or that coat was just looking so nice in that early sunrise. And they decided they had had enough. They were willing to defy God's will and to put him to death. They threw him into a pit. And that was going to be the end of the story. But as in many things, greed gets in the way. And as they see a tribe of Ishmaelites coming down, isn't it surprising it's the Ishmaelites? One of them said, hey, we could make some money off of it. Why don't we don't have to kill them, right? Let's make a profit. And they sold him into slavery, which was the worst thing they could have ever done. You see, for a Jewish person, carrying the name of your father was the most important thing in life. It's where your inheritance comes from. It's who you're known by. Yeshua was known as what? Yeshua ben Joseph. Yeshua, son of Joseph. When we call people up to the Bema, we will use their Hebrew name followed by their father's name. Joseph is being thrown into prison, a slave, losing his identity. His parents, his father thinks he's dead, isn't coming looking for him, and his brothers will soon forget him. Joseph was sold to an Egyptian who had high powers for Pharaoh. And you would think maybe he had some light, as Joseph, even though being put into slavery, was put in this man's house, and he still saw how God blessed him even in these situations, to the point that he was raised up to a high point in this man's life. But we all know the story. The wife gets jealous. Maybe his master was paying more attention to Joseph because of the blessings he was receiving from him than his wife. His wife decided she wanted to have an affair and tried to seduce Joseph time and time again. Joseph could have given in. Let's face it. He saw his life ruined. His dreams that God had given him were gone. He was now a mere slave. How were his brothers and father going to bow down to him? His father thought he was even dead. But he stayed faithful to God. The vision that he had stayed strong. And even at that point of that temptation, and I really think, when I was rereading the story, we all put kind of aside the fact that Joseph, when he ran out, he wasn't wearing any clothes, was he? She had the robe in his hand. Was he at that final breaking point? That point of no return? But yet, he stayed faithful to God. And even though he did nothing wrong, he was thrown into prison. She cried rape and everyone believed her. Why? Because Joseph was just a slave. He sat in the dungeon. Now let me give you a picture. How many of you have ever gone to visit a prison? Okay, some of you probably have seen it on one side of the bars or the other. We're not going there, right? But, let's face it, a lot of the prisons we have today, they got color TV, they got the internet, they got weight rooms. It's a life of luxury, right? That's not how it was at the time of Joseph. We've been to Israel where you could see where they would carve out these places. These were bitter, damp, cold places with no sunlight. You're basically put in there to die. Joseph could have given up. He could have sat there and blamed his brothers for where he was. He could have taken that situation and brought it into bitterness. If I ever get my hands on them. Of course, none of you have ever said that, have you? He had no hope of rescue. But he had the promise from God. Let me make one thing very clear. The purpose that God has for your life, no man can take away. Let me say that again. The purpose that God has for your life, no man, no spouse, no child, not even the devil can take it away. When these things started happening, do you think God looked down and said, Yeshua, what are we going to do? Joseph's been thrown into prison. His brothers have betrayed him. Quick, come up with another plan. That's it. That was our whole plan. We only had one idea of what he was going to do. No. God puts us in situations so we can learn. See, we need to go through those trials and tribulations. It's how we react to them is what is the importance. No one can change God's plan. There is one person, and that's you. If you fall out of the will of God, that's when things change. But no one else can pull that away from you. It doesn't matter how hard they try. God's purpose will come through. He's in prison for a crime he never committed. He's enslaved because he told the truth. While he's in there, he has a choice to make. Even with limited freedom, he still has the choice to make. His response to all those things that have happened can give him two choices. Does he become offended and bitter towards his brothers and eventually God, giving up all hope of the promise, robbing himself of the last incentive of life that he has? Or does he stay true to God's plan? We have to remember God is in control. When I was 16 years old, I was driving in a car. I was with my girlfriend at the time, and we were going to go see a movie. And we were getting off the highway. And I had noticed when I had been driving. This was when 75 was a 2-lane highway. I'm now aging myself. And we were driving down, and I had passed a black Trans Am. Yes, it was the 80s. And I remember thinking to myself, this person's going really slow on the highway. And as I started getting off on the exit, it was a long exit. By the way, it was exit 13. They've renumbered the exits. It's now it was the Union City exit. I glanced into my rearview mirror, into my side mirror to see where that Trans Am was. To my surprise, he was literally right next to me. Matter of fact, as he was hitting me, I saw and I swerved, hitting the guardrail. His car continued going on. My car flipped 3 times. The sunroof that was on the car and closed, by the way, was ripped off. I was not wearing a seatbelt. That time you weren't required to, and this is probably one of those rare exceptions that it probably did save my life. I was thrown out through the sunroof onto the street. The car flipped 3 times. The last time, the girl I was dating, she fell out of the car. Fortunately, she only had a couple of scrapes. An 18-wheeler was the next thing to pull up, saw didn't see the accident, but came up afterwards, and blocked the highway. The next 2 cars that came up was a registered nurse and a paramedic who had just gotten off duty. They had told my parents that if I made it through the first night, it would be a miracle, and I'd be in the hospital for 2 months. I've seen pictures of me. I was literally laying on over a metal table. They said my face was the size of a basketball. At one time, in the waiting room with my parents, was a Baptist minister. I'm not making this is not a joke. A Baptist minister, a Catholic priest, and a rabbi. The doctors walked in, and they said, "What, you don't have faith in us?" And one of them cried out, "We'll take it any way we can get it." When I awoke after the first of surgeries, I remember that I acted unusual, they said. You see, I didn't blame the person who had done it to me. I wasn't upset because I was blind in my right eye. I was not crying, not having these emotions. Because all I could think about was this young boy from when I used to teach at a day camp. His name was Gad. He was a Jewish day camp, and he was born with a situation where they had to take his feet off from the heel forward. So all he had was the heel. And he had to learn to walk on 2 artificial legs. And you would think that the other kids would make fun of him, or he would be the last picked when they were playing dodgeball or kickball. But in fact, he was usually one of the first ones picked. Because he would give 110%. He and I had developed a very close bond. And I remember one time in particular. This time it was a few years later, and I was his counselor. And we were playing soccer, and he was the goalie. That way he didn't have to run as much. And he got the ball, and I started yelling to him, "Kick the ball to me." And one of the other counselors said, "No, kick it to me." And so what happens? He kicks the ball. Pretty good kick, by the way. and the ball goes flying. Right behind that ball was his leg doing somersaults in the air. For a 15-year-old kid, that was kind of funny, you got to admit. But I knew that we couldn't let him see that. I still remember looking over at the other counselor, because we both knew the same thing. We could not let the kids see us laugh. We quickly turned away to catch our composure. And as we're turned away from him, we hear this laughing, bellowing from a child. And as we turn around, Gad is on the ground laughing his heart out. What man had tried for bad, God had turned for good. I knew that it didn't matter what had happened to me. The fact was, I was still alive. I still had another eye. My right hand was injured. I'm left-handed. I have a dislocated right shoulder, missing 3 teeth, more scars than G.I. Joe. They were concerned, though. I wasn't acting the right way. So they sent a psychiatrist in to see me. I was pretty much probably still on morphine at this time. And I remember him coming in and he said, I need to ask you some questions. And he started asking and he said, I want you to start naming the presidents from current backwards. How many of y'all could do that? Not on drugs, okay? And so I start naming a couple of them. And I finally got to the point where I forgot. And he goes, well, you forgot one. And I'm thinking, and I can't remember. And I went, who? He goes, Nixon. I said, oh, we're all trying to forget about Nixon. With that, he closed his book and said, you're fine, and left. The point is, God was in control. I didn't know what God had in store for me. And I didn't even at that point know Yeshua as my Savior. But he had a reason to save me that day. He could have taken me off the face of this earth in the twinkling of an eye. What that drunk driver tried to do, God turned to good. We see that in the life of Joseph. He's in prison. And yet, he still has not lost his faith. Remember the 2 men that were with him. They have a dream, and he interprets the dream for them. One of them, he tells that in a few days that you're going to die. And the other, he says, in a few days, you're going to be set free. And when he says it to that man, what was his only request? Just remember me. See if you can get me out. You know, this person must have known that Joseph was an innocent man. He probably truly was one of the first people in prison who was innocent, right? Everyone you go to say, I'm innocent, right? Sure, they found my fingerprints on the on the gun, and they had the video, but it wasn't me, right? He said, just remember me. 2 years pass. You can imagine Joseph once again saying, well, there's another one who let me down. See, the key thing we have to do is stop blaming others for what we do. Often we look at the impossibilities of our situation, and instead of looking at the greatness of God, as a result, we are discouraged and need to put blame on someone so that it looks so that we look for those who we can feel responsible and literally put our bitterness on them, our offense on them. We have to stop blaming others. He could have blamed the man for forgetting the promise that he made, but he didn't. If you think about it, Joseph had a lot of time in that prison. He could have been thinking, well, if I ever do get out of here, my brothers are going to pay and pay dearly. How many times do we want revenge when someone offends us? If that was Joseph, if Joseph had taken that offense, God would have left him in there to rot. Why? Because if he had come out, and we all know the end of the story, he would have killed the 12 tribes of Israel, including the one in which our Messiah would come. There's a bigger plan. We know that the man eventually did remember what Joseph did. Joseph was brought before the Pharaoh. He interpreted the dream. And what happened? Pharaoh made him second in command. He had gone down to the most bitterness, the most lowest point in life. God never forgot the promise. Joseph came out of that situation ready to lead. And as the time came, they prepared during those years. They brought extra food into the storehouses, right? So that when the famine did happen, Joseph was able to save many. It was because Joseph stayed faithful to God. He saw the dream, interpreted it, and not only interpreted it, but now was to oversee and take care of it. He fulfilled the promise of that scripture. And then one day, who comes into town? But 10 brothers looking for food. Joseph recognizes his brothers. But do they recognize him? No. Were they even looking for him? In their minds, he was dead. They couldn't see their own brother's face because their eyes had been covered. He immediately knew who his brothers were. He could have said, "Now I got him." But what did he do? He gave them grain and gold and silver. When they got back home and they undid the bags and they found it, what did they do? They thought, now they're in big trouble, aren't they? Then they had to go back. And finally, Joseph reveals the truth to them. I want to turn to Genesis chapter 45, verses 5 through 8. We're going to read. But now, do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. Continue. For these 2 years of the famine have been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a what? Prosperity for thank you. For you in the earth, and to save your what? Lives by a great deliverance. God had a plan. Joseph understood it. He didn't get bitter. Satan didn't get him in that trap. And let's face it, if you had gone through the trials and tribulations Joseph did, most of y'all would have been doing what when your brothers came? Kill them? Torture them. Not just, don't go easy on them. Let's face it, you're number 2 in command. You can pretty much do whatever you want. No one's going to question you. But he remembered who number 1 was. That's the importance. He understood God's plan. Man can try to put you down. You know how many times I've heard people come to me, oh, Rabbi, I would be in ministry if it just wasn't for my spouse. Oh, Rabbi, man, I would have finances if it just wasn't for those kids I had to raise. We love to blame it on others, don't we? If you have a calling, no one's going to stop you. The only one who can stop you from your calling is you. I was blessed to be under... Did my mic just go out? No? Okay. I was blessed to be under probably 2 of the greatest leaders in our movement today. Robert Solomon from Beth Hallel and Jonathan Burness from Jewish Voice Ministries. I learned a lot from both of them. I learned a lot of good things to do. I learned some things not to do. One of the greatest things I learned from Jonathan is that if he saw a calling in you, he was willing to back you. He literally put you up as a trophy, not in a good sense. He's here to help you, and he wants to see you prosper. He wants to see your ministry work. And he wants to be able to not say, look at what I did, but look what God did through me. He's done a great work. We can learn a lot from people in our lives. When I started the congregation, I learned a lot from Robert. Things to do and not to do. I just had an old friend of ours pass away. They had a memorial for him just this past Thursday. It was the first time in many years I had stepped back at Beth Hallel. I was on Jewish Standard Time, so I was actually a little late, fighting the traffic. The only seat that ended up being available was in the very back row. I ended up sitting next to Rabbi Kevin's wife and Robert. And I remember the gentleman that we were there for was a World War II vet, and they came and did the flag ceremony. And if you've never seen that before, it's an amazing sight. After it was done, Robert turned to me and said, at my funeral, they'll be doing that too. And I thought for a minute, here's a man who's talking about his death, and the greatest thing he knows, though, that's what was important to him, was to see that ceremony being done. He served his country. He has served God in what he's done. We have to remember those things. We can learn a lot from our mentors. We need to continue to build in our lives. God has a purpose and a calling. And again, even though sometimes man tries to take us astray, God doesn't take it away from us. You know, it's interesting that sometimes people don't see that in us, right? But yet we have to realize God has a plan. I want us to understand that God sent him. It says that he didn't blame it on the brothers. The brothers didn't put him there. He said, God sent me here so I could save lives. Again, the only person that can get you out of the will of God is you. Stay faithful. Don't blame it. If that pastor or that rabbi had just seen my gifts, I would have been able to do something about it. If God has called you to do something, no man can take it away from you. You can give the Lord a hand, amen? You know, the Israelites were in the desert, and they became offended with Moses and God. We know the story. What? There weren't enough graves in Egypt. You had to take us out here so we could die. They complained about the food. Right? They didn't, have enough water. Everything was, we say kvetching. They're kvetching. They're driving you crazy, right? Moses could have said, enough, I'm done with it. He comes down from the mountain. They're already back worshiping idols. And I love the story that Aaron says. They forced him, right? Aaron, a great example, right? Moses goes, what happened? I don't know. They gave me this gold. We melted it down and poof, popped out. It was a miracle. I don't know how it happened. Again, blaming others instead of taking responsibility for yourself. Because that generation had taken offense. And let's face it, that generation saw miracles. Water turned to blood. Let's face it, we've seen all that stuff. You would believe whatever the man had said, right? Come on, locusts, fire, boils, death of the firstborn. These things, come on, the news can't make this up, right? And yet, they didn't have faith that God could take them through the desert and bring them to the promised land. They became bitter and offensive. And for that reason, that generation did not see the promised land. Except for two. Who are the two? Caleb and Joshua. It's such an I love that picture. Because most people don't realize that Caleb was what? A Gentile. If you tell that to your church friends, heck, if you tell that to your Jewish friends, they're not going to believe you until they see it in the Scripture. Two believed, a Jew and a Gentile. They stayed faithful to God's word. And they were able to lead the people in to the land that God promised. Many people have been serving the Lord and have come into difficult life situations because of them being mistreated by either wicked men or true believers. The truth is that they have been betrayed, they have been treated unjustly. But to become offended will only fulfill the enemy's purpose of getting them out of the will of God. Don't get offended. If you stay free from offense, you will stay in God's will. If you become offended, you'll be taken captive by the enemy to fulfill his own purpose and will. The choice is yours. But I can tell you the benefit of freedom is not to take offense. I want to pull up this last scripture, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. That is not the correct, chapter 10, verse 13. You forgot the zero. The O. I'm not offended. Two of the toughest jobs in this ministry, I can tell you right now, is not being the rabbi, it's not being the cantor, it's being the sound person and the video clicker. Because, you know what, if I make a mistake, we just kind of roll with it. Everyone looks at them, right? No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. I want to read that line again. Who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape that you may be able to what? Bear it. No weapon formed against you shall prosper, says the Lord. You might be feeling, Lord, I can't take another step. He's like, yes, you can. He will not give you more than you can handle. Some of you think that. Right? You just, Lord, I can't do it anymore. Yes, you can. He will not give us more than we can handle. We need those trials and tribulations in our life so that when God brings us to our fullness of our calling, we'll be able to do it. We need those times to learn so that we can grow. I remember one of the things I said that when I started our ministry, I said, there's one thing that my old rabbi did that I would say I would never, ever, ever do until that day I had to do it. I understood then what was going on. We need to learn. We need to grow. We need to learn that when things aren't as we think they should be, that God is still in control. We need to understand the purpose that God has for us. And when man starts telling you, oh, you must not be hearing from the Lord, look at your life situation. That's when you say, stop being one of Job's friends. Remember him? Yes. Boy, man, what did his friends... They finally got to... It said, just curse God and be done with it. Right? Let God kill you. Obviously, you've done something so bad. I don't even know why we're your friends anymore. But you did something so bad that you just have to curse God and let him kill you. And what did he do? he kept praising the Lord. And God brought him through that. I guarantee you, when Joseph was in the dungeon, some of those guys said, I don't know what you did. I know what I did to get here, but man, you must have been pretty bad because they won't even believe you. You're stuck here. You're going to die here. Just give up. I'm never going to bow down to you. Or do you keep the vision on God's plan? He has a calling for you. Use it. Stop making excuses. If only my spouse would support me in this matter. Maybe they just need to catch the vision. Maybe they need to see you finally doing what you're saying. You know, talk is cheap, isn't it? Put it to action. You know, it's funny. When Judy and I were dating, I remember she told me that a Christian friend of hers once prayed over her and said that she would be a pastor's wife. She said, "You crazy?" Not that she wasn't a believer. She wasn't serious. I was a pastor's wife. Well, okay, rabbis, close enough. You know, we're not going to get hooked on phonetics here, right? That person saw something, and Judy didn't put the obstacle. Didn't maybe not believe it. Has God spoken to you? Has he told you what your calling is? If he has, what are you doing to do it? And guess what? It's not an easy road. I have people say, I want to go into ministry. And I say, are you crazy? I say, are you ready to be beat up by the devil? Oh, I can handle it, Rabbi. Yeah, okay. Heard that one before. And they start going in ministry, and guess what? Their life starts crumbling down around them. Some say, I can't do it. Walk away. Others use that situation. Keep the eye on the end. And persevere. I cannot say that word. Persevere through. Thank you. I couldn't say filet mignon for years. We got to keep our faith. You know, I'll never forget one of the things my brother told me after my car accident. He said, I don't know what God has in store for you, but it must be something. My question to you is, I don't know what God's in store for you, but it must be something. Find it. Follow it. Don't make excuses. Rabbi, if I only had enough money. You can do it with nothing. If God has a calling, watch what will happen. I can tell you time and time again, Rabbi, what happens if I go out and I fail? Get up and try it again. If God has called it, no man can stop it. That's what you have to live on. He might take us through some different trails. We might have to follow some different paths that we didn't ever thought we would do. If you were going to tell me I would be ministering in Cuba, I would say you're crazy. I didn't want to go to Cuba. Had no desire at all. God said, you're going to Cuba. Guess what? I went to Cuba. Changed my life. Don't fight God. He knows what's going on. He has put us for such a time as this. The question that I ask you again is simple. if you've been treated wrong, are you going to be offended? Or are you going to forgive and look at the greatness that God has in store? We have a lot to learn. We need to keep our focus on Him. Amen? Give the Lord a hand. Amen. Don't let Satan get in the way. He loves to do that. He loves to just mess with you. You know what the greatest thing you can do with the Satan is say what? Don't do. Yeah, but if you just do that, what he's going to laugh at you. In the name of Yeshua, what? Be gone. See, he doesn't have to listen to you. He has to listen to God. He doesn't have a choice. When you say, be gone, he can say, I ain't going nowhere. Who are you? It's like that kid looking at his stepfather. You're not my dad. You can't tell me what to do, right? But when you say, in the name of Yeshua, be gone. He's like, I'm out of here. See ya. Can't touch you. Call upon the name and follow the calling in your life.